This is Our Voices, Our Legacies, the Medical College of Wisconsin's Oral History Project. I'm Dick Hatchke, MCW's Chief Historian. Today is April 22nd, 2016, and we're talking with Dr. William Hendee. Dr. Hendee was the founding dean of the Medical College of Wisconsin's Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences. He also served as Senior Associate Dean for Research and Vice President for Technology Development, and was also the Interim Dean and Executive Vice President. Why did you choose to come to MCW originally? How did you wind up coming here?
Interesting question. I decided that I would leave the American Medical Association as a consequence of some changes administratively that occurred at that organization. That's where I was before I came here as vice president. And I looked at four different institutions, four different positions, 3 academic positions and 1 position at the National Institutes of Health. And I opted to take the position in Milwaukee for 2 reasons. One reason, very important, was that I had narrowed it down to the position at the National Institutes of Health and the position here at the Medical College, which at the time that I accepted the position here was the Senior Associate Dean for Research position, not the graduate school position. That came later. And I liked what I found here in terms of the philosophy of the faculty, the commitment to education and teaching, and the quality of the students that were graduating from the medical school here. The graduate school was very small at the time. It had only 102 students when I first came. And the second reason was that it was a comparison between living in Bethesda, Maryland, Washington, D.C. area, and Milwaukee. And my wife helped me make that decision by saying that if I chose Milwaukee, she would come with me. So those 2 things together made me decide to come to the Medical College of Wisconsin, a decision, by the way, which I never regretted.
When you were first talking to people at MCW, who were some of the faculty leaders that you talked with, and what were some of the things that were happening here that perhaps intrigued you?
Well, of course, I spoke with all the chairs of the basic science group, and Alan Colley had this magnificent research program underway in cardiovascular research, which he continues to do, and he's a world leader in that area. And that was really compelling because he had an influence not only in his own research and not only in the faculty of the Department of Physiology, which he chaired, but it also permeated other departments here. And there were people in biochemistry and pharmacology also working in the cardiovascular area, I think as a consequence of his serving as a kind of magnet for attracting high quality faculty here. So I certainly remember that as a very important part of this. You also had at the time, a strong biophysics program. It was in the Department of Radiology. We moved that out of radiology not long after I came here, and it created its own Institute of Biophysics, which now is the Department of Biophysics. But a very strong biophysics program in both electron spin resonance and magnetic resonance imaging, and the latter was an area that I was particularly interested in as well. So with people like Jim Hyde and others that were here, Andrzej Jasmanowicz, who borders on my definition of genius, and a few others, that was a very strong department. And of course, radiology was here, and Jim Euchre and I had been friends for 30 years. Maybe by the time that I came up here in 1991, I better make that 20 years. But we've been close friends, and it was an opportunity to work in a strong department, radiology, with an appointment in radiology, which that also was part of the reason. I knew Frank Wilson very well as chair of radiation oncology. Strong department here, nationally known department in radiation oncology. And at the time, let's see, the Department of Biochemistry was open, and the Department of Pharmacology was open. I helped in the recruitment efforts for both Bill Campbell and Owen Griffith when I first came. And so there were real strengths in the basic sciences. There were strengths in the clinical departments that I knew about. And of course, I met other strong people like Bob Condon and people like that. And so it was a really interesting institution, standalone, a freestanding medical school, not tied to a university, therefore had to create a basic science infrastructure that would support not only the teaching of medical students, but also the research program that permeated the entire basic science community. Strong institution, head in the right place in terms of education.
When you came on, what did you identify as perhaps the the priority that you had in building the research program here at MCW? What was it that you wanted to achieve?
Well, when I first came, there was no position of in charge of the research program here. And Buzz Cooper, the dean of the medical school, was attempting to do everything. And so there were several activities that were sort of running on their own, like clinical research, human clinical research. No real oversight, no real direction. And there were many other areas like that as well that were just sort of standing on their own, all the basic safety programs. And I saw an opportunity not only to congeal these programs into one area reporting to a senior associate dean for research, myself, and therefore being able to help and support and encourage activities in these areas, but also that would provide a very strong, much stronger infrastructure for all the research programs on campus if you had some kind of organizational administrative support structure and all the supporting activities that go along with research. So my first activity when I came was to try to bring all that together. And then, of course, as I got here and I learned more about the graduate school, I also saw tremendous opportunities there. At the time, it was not a graduate school, it was a program. And I became, so the person who was running that program stepped down, and we did a search for a new program director with the idea that it would ultimately create a graduate school. And we went through that search for, I don't know, not very successfully because it wasn't a school yet. And then in I can get my dates right here, 1995, I think it was, with the new dean, Michael Dunn, coming into the medical school, the decision was, well, why wait to create a graduate school after we recruit a dean? Let's get a dean, and then Mike Boger asked me to be the dean, and let's create a graduate school now. Well, you know, that was the right decision. And we went from 102 graduate students to 400 and something graduate students when I left. I don't remember the exact number, but it really expanded.
Now, when you were, when you took on the role as senior associate dean, you identified that there were some chairs that were open, you know, so you were involved in the searches for those.
Right.
And then you were also involved, too, in helping recruit some of the research scientists and research faculty to MCW as well. Who were some of the people that you helped bring to MCW, and what was it that you were looking for in terms of talent that these individuals helped bring?
Well, I tend to forget names. I've been gone 10 years. But we wanted to recruit, and I think we being the department chairs working with myself and the dean of the medical school, wanted to bring some younger faculty that had great promise. Some of them came out of our own graduate program, of course, but we also wanted to recruit people in from outside as well. And not only in the basic sciences, but in the clinical sciences. So for example, people like John Ulmer in radiology and Ted Dio, who was at the time, I think, in cell biology, who's now in radiology. Kathleen Schminda, great asset to this institution. These were all young, hardworking, promising faculty members that sort of breathed new life into the research programs that were here already. And that was true in all the departments. And of course, when we recruited new chairs in biochemistry and pharmacology, for example, and then ultimately in biophysics, they also added to the effort to bring new faculty in. So it was a kind of breathing new life into the entire institution. Very exciting.
Now, in the 1990s, when you headed research at MCW, we also had the distinction of being the nation's fastest growing research institution in terms of NIH funding. Mm-hmm. What happened that suddenly MCW was on the fast track and was getting the NIH support, which again wasn't easy support to get? I mean, the competition for NIH funding back then was fierce as it is today. What happened that we were suddenly doing so well in terms of securing NIH funding?
I think we've already answered that question. I think that it was a product of bringing new faculty in, younger faculty members who were eager and essentially required to set up their own research program. That requires extramural funding. The best extramural funding, of course, is from the National Institutes of Health in the area of biomedicine. And so we had a lot of young, hungry faculty, very bright and very hardworking, necessary for them to develop their own programs and therefore to get their own support in order to thrive in an institution like this. I think there's one thing about the medical college, and that is you can do very well here, but you've got to work hard and you've got to be successful. And so everybody knows that coming here. This is not a part of a large institution. This is a standalone medical center, and you have every opportunity to do very well here, but you got to work hard and you got to be successful, which means you got to be smart. You got to be able to commit yourself to a hard work ethic, and you got to enjoy the fruits of your success. And that really characterizes the medical college, and I think that's the reason for the success.
Now, one of the other things that you also helped do was give energy and life to the whole technology development program here. And tell us a little bit about how did you approach that and what were you trying to accomplish with technology development?
It wasn't an institutional commitment to it, I think, and that's the way to put it, so that the chairs and the senior faculty didn't really see it as part of the program or the mandate of the college. That needed to change. And of course, it was also that beginning across the country, a recognition that institutions like the medical college, biomedical research institutions, needed to diversify their sources of support, find ways to bring money into the institution to support the research effort above and beyond, not excluding, but above and beyond just support for the National Institutes of Health. And even back then, we recognized that someday the NIH support is going to flatten out or diminish. And an institution that's totally dependent on that is going to run into trouble. So to diversify our sources of support and think about how do we expand and make broader this base of support meant that we had to look at a lot of different places. And one place to look is to say, we've got a lot of smart people here who are coming up with great ideas. We should capitalize on those ideas, not only by trying to produce products that get out into the marketplace and generate revenue to come in and support the research effort, but also as opportunities for the college to invest itself in some of these technologies. In other words, to invest in its own intellect. And so we started to really push this amongst the fact, and there was some at the beginning there was some resistance. You know, the resistance being, well, we're pure researchers. We do our research to create new knowledge and explore new venues, and we're not really interested in commercial spin-offs or making things practical, because that sort of demeans the purity of our research effort. There was that kind of attitude, not just in this institution, but in all institutions. And we had to move through that. But it's very interesting that now in this country, institutions like the medical college have not only moved through that resistance, that suspicion, but now are actively promoting the products of their own research effort, getting them into products that can help patients. So you're actually doing something practical and good with the products of your own intellectual expertise, but also generating some revenue that comes back to support the research effort. So it's been an interesting transformation over the last 20, 25 years and how that has changed.
Well, now, it's interesting in that you led the biomedical research activities and the technology development activities at Wisconsin's second largest biomedical research institution. And so between University of Wisconsin-Madison and MCW, approximately 90% of all NIH funding was coming here, and we really were the two institutions without really any other players in the state involved in biomedical research. But at Madison, you also have WARF. And so you had this powerhouse in terms of technology development that already existed in the state. What were the challenges of trying to create a technology development activity and infrastructure at an institution when the other medical school in the state already had such a powerhouse that was in place?
It actually helped. First, I want to say that yes, most of the research support for the National Institutes of Health that comes to Wisconsin comes to these two medical institutions. You would expect that because most NIH support is in biomedicine, but not all of it. Marquette University in this Department of Biomedical Engineering does a important piece of that research, and some of the research is being done in Marshfield and so forth. So it's not exclusive to the two institutions. I wanted to be sure that we gave credit to some of these other institutions that have a part of that action as well. WARF is the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation is very successful, and much of its success is because of a couple of products that they developed early on, like ergosterol added to milk to provide vitamin D, which was a supplement that now whenever you buy milk, there's added vitamin D to it, which is very important for all of us, including children. And another product that came out of the University of Wisconsin was warfarin, otherwise known as Coumadin, which is a blood thinning agent that is widely used in humans that have a propensity for clot formation. And so those two products in and of themselves have generated so much revenue for the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation that it has done very well. And of course now they have also other products that they have helped market in addition. Well, yes, you've got a very good example of what an institution can do in terms of taking advantage of its own intellectual effort in terms of getting things out into the marketplace. So that's a good model for us. So we used that. We said, well, what we'd like to do, we are not WARF here at the Medical College of Wisconsin, but we could be someday if we get one or two things that really hit it big, because WARF got one or two things that really hit it big. And so we set up this Office of Technology Transfer, the Research Foundation, and we've been pushing things just like WARF, trying to get them out in the commercial sector. We haven't hit a Coumadin yet, and we haven't hit, a vitamin D yet, but the next one might be. You just don't know.
But the other thing that you did was you also gave visibility to the potential for entrepreneurs to invest in intelligence in Milwaukee, and that beyond Madison, there were other activities. You were the one who really gave life and visibility to the fact that there was research that was being conducted in Milwaukee that had the potential for transfer. And even today, I know I talk with reporters, they cite the fact that you created that energy in this market. How was that received at the time, the idea that suddenly Milwaukee could move into this arena as part of our economy?
Well, as you might expect, there was some skepticism from some parties who said, well, we're not Johns Hopkins, and we're not Mass General, and we're not the Research Triangle in North Carolina. So those are very goals to aspire to, but Milwaukee is really not capable of doing something like that. That just drove me nuts when people would say that, because of course Milwaukee is capable of doing some really important things. And I always thought that someday we would have something like Route 128 in Boston, which is a lot of high-tech companies, or in Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. When I would look at Chicago to Milwaukee to Madison, I thought we had potential of generating a kind of research corridor, taking some of the institutions in Chicago, and we actually had meetings with the deans of some of the schools in Chicago and UW-Madison and here to say we could do a lot more if we did things together, and if we worked together to try to create a presence, a biotechnology presence in this corridor between Chicago and Madison. We had some very interesting discussions, and but things like that are slow going because you have quite a few people who are skeptical, and the other thing is that it takes a lot of effort and people are busy with their own activities. But we were making some progress at the time that I was leaving and beginning to think along those lines, and I think that we should still continue that thought.
Now, when Richard Cooper stepped down as the dean of the medical school and the executive vice president, and before Mike Dunn was recruited to come in to be his successor, Mike Bolger turned to you to serve as the interim dean and executive vice president. How did you approach that role, and and how did it differ from the things that you'd already been doing at MCW?
Well, the first thing that I did when Mike Bolger asked me if I would be willing to do that is I said, well, give me 3 or 4 days to think of this over, because I am not an MD. And to be dean of a medical school, even interim dean of a medical school, as a non-MD, it would be a pretty rare position. In fact, I only know of one other person in the country who was ever a non-MD dean of a medical school, and that was at the University of Chicago many years ago.
When I was there.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's the only example. And so, of course, I had been chairman of radiology at Colorado for 10 years, and I was the only, and still am the only non-MD to be chair of a clinical radiology department with 3 hospitals. So I thought, well, okay, I did that. I probably could do this, but I'm not sure how well I'd be received. So I went to talk to some of the senior faculty on the clinical department chairs to ask the question of, if I take this position, are you going to support me, and are you going to feel comfortable with that, being that I'm not an MD? And the most influential of all the people that I talked to was Bob Condon. And I never forget this conversation. He said, well, Bill, he said, I don't have any problems with your being interim dean of the medical. Are you going to be the dean? I mean, the permanent dean? And I said, no. I said, I'm just, sort of fill in until we get a new dean. And he said, well, you should think about whether you want to be considered. And I said, well, I don't think so. I'm just asking you about whether I should be the interim dean. He said, well, you'd be fine. He said, I don't think you'd have any problems with the faculty. You're well respected and so forth. He said, of course, if I were you, I wouldn't do it. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, I'll tell you why. He said, if you're the interim dean and you're not going to be the full-time dean, as interim dean, you're going to find out things about things that are happening here at the college and some of the faculty that you probably did want to know. And then at some point you're going to step back away from being the dean, and you're just going to be Bill Hendee, Senior Associate Dean for Research and faculty member. But the people are going to know that you know things about them. He said, so you might find it uncomfortable. So that's why I wouldn't do it. But he said, if you want to do it and you agree to it, he said, you'll have everybody supporting you. Well, I did do it. And Bob Condon's worst fears were not realized, actually, but it was a kind of funny conversation. But he helped me focus my efforts for sure.
Sure. Now, as Dunn was then recruited, Mike Bolger asked that you take on another hat, and that was Dean of the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences. You'd mentioned that there had been a search, and why did you consider taking on the graduate school leadership role, and what did you hope to achieve by taking on that role?
Several things. One is the graduate school was known as a program. I think to graduate from an institution with an advanced degree, a master's or especially a PhD, out of an institution that does not have a graduate school, does not give full recognition to the quality of the degree. I think that you really need, if you're going to have graduate students, you really need a graduate school, which means that these activities to train PhD scientists are well recognized by the institution. So one reason was, let's get this to be a graduate school. We've been talking about it, we haven't done it, and I think it would be an advantage to all the students if they came out of a graduate school. So that was one reason. Another reason was, I saw such potential. We had good students. We could have more good students. There were more opportunities for students. And we could grow this program and could really provide a service to not only to our own faculty, but also to students who are interested in creating careers for themselves in biomedical, in the biomedical sciences, either in academics or in industry or wherever. And so we had a great opportunity, something that needed to be done, and I thought it would be a lot of fun to do it. And if you should never take a job that you don't think is going to be fun. And I've always abided by that philosophy, and we had a great time in the graduate school. So in 1995, we created the graduate school. There were, as I say, 102 students when I when I left here, there were 400 something students. And our students got placed in very good positions, both in academics and in industry, and also went on to very strong postdoctoral programs. So the school here has been very successful.
Looking back on your tenure as the dean of the graduate school, one of the things that was interesting was the creation of joint degree programs. How did those come about? How did you work with the departments and with other institutions to create these joint degree programs?
Well, you see, one of the disadvantages, it's not really a disadvantage, but one of the limitations of a standalone medical college is that there are many academic disciplines that are not present here as programs. If you're in a large university, you can build bridges across departments in that university, but we don't have a School of Information Sciences or computer science, or we don't have, until recently, a Department of Biomedical Engineering here. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Or engineering sciences here. And so we have no option, but if you want to develop some disciplines, you want to develop a discipline that cuts across more than one area that might be present here. And a good example would be, say, medical informatics or biomedical informatics or healthcare technologies management. You have to look at where are the resources that can fill in the gaps that you can't provide yourself. And in a school like the medical college, you have to look to other institutions because they have them. I mean, for example, Marquette has a biomedical engineering department. So if you want to create a program in healthcare sciences technology, is that what the program is? Healthcare technology management. If you want to create a program like that, you've got to have an engineering expertise, you've got to have business expertise, and you've got to have health sciences expertise. So you have no option but to try to bridge from across institutions. And so we did that with healthcare technologies management with Marquette, with bioinformatics with Marquette, with medical informatics with Medical College of Wisconsin.
MSOE.
I'm sorry, Milwaukee School of Engineering. We developed a program. It's not really a joint program, but we are involved in the PhD program in information sciences at University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And when I was here, I made an effort. It's very interesting how this has evolved. I made an effort I said, you know, Marquette has biomedical engineering, but doesn't have the medical part of biomedical engineering. Medical College of Wisconsin has the medical part, but doesn't have the engineering part. Would it be feasible for us to develop a joint program, a joint degree program in biomedical engineering that would provide additional opportunities for the students at Marquette, because they would be tied in with all the medical research that's going on over here, and would be a great advantage for Marquette because we would have that engineering expertise coming in. And so at that time we were talking about, well, could we say merge the Biophysics Research Institute, which is down the Department of Biophysics, could we merge that with the Department of Biomedical Engineering and create a joint degree program? Well, we did it in part. We created a joint degree program in functional imaging, which was really primarily magnetic resonance imaging. But my idea was something bigger that was a joint department, a Department of Biomedical Engineering that would bridge both schools. And it was an idea before its time at the time that I was here. I was a little bit ahead of myself. And so it's really delightful to see that happening now, you know, this joint Department of Biomedical Engineering. I mean, it's exactly what we were talking about, but it was just not time. The time had not yet arrived for that discussion when I was here.
But what you did is you also opened the idea to the Medical College of Wisconsin community that we could engage with other academic institutions and strengthen the programs that we have. So the creation of the joint degree programs that you did have in many respects led to the new partnerships that you see today that exist between MCW and UWM, MSOE, Marquette, you know, and extending to Concordia and some of the other institutions as well.
Concordia is one that never occurred to me, but yes, I think that's exactly right. And what Milwaukee needs to do is to look at itself as a composite. There's tremendous intellectual capital here with the UWM and Marquette and all these institutions in the medical college, tremendous intellectual capital. They're not under one university blanket, which tends to make people think of them as separate entities. But if you think about them collectively, you recognize that this is really an intellectual largesse for the southeastern Wisconsin area and beyond. We just have to think collectively rather than individually. And I think you're right. I think that that's really happening now with the clinical sciences grant and some of the other things that are going on. And it's really important for Milwaukee to think this way.
When you reflect on the many hats that you wore at MCW, what are some of the achievements that you are proudest of? What are some of the things that you look back on and you're proud of what you were able to accomplish, or what you were able to accomplish with others here at MCW?
I think the growth of the graduate school is one thing that I would say I don't want to take. It's not because I did it. It's because it was all the pieces were there. They just needed to be brought together, and people again needed to recognize that we really have an opportunity for growth here in the graduate area. And so I think that's an area that I found very exciting, and I loved every part of being dean of the graduate school, and we had tremendous staff supporting the graduate school as well. So I would say that was one thing. I would say another thing was that when I came here, as I mentioned, clinical research was very fragmented. And no one really knew what was going on. Different investigators had different clinical research projects involving human studies, but there was no real synthesis of this into a collective strength and enterprise for the medical college. And one of the things that we did was we set up a fairly complex structure of institutional review boards that were designed not to be prohibitive or not to be impediments to clinical research, but to be very supportive and to find ways and mechanisms that people could legitimately pursue their interest in human studies research of various pharmaceuticals or clinical protocols without getting themselves in trouble or anything like that. What I'm trying to say is that we viewed the IRBs as facilitatory rather than as impediments. But that was true with the philosophy of several activities I was involved in. Radiation safety, for example. Sometimes radiation safety offices in institutions like this can become just big barriers. Or the institutional animal, I cook, animal, whatever I did.
Care and Use Committee.
Care and Use Committee. You know, I've been gone from this for 10 years. These things slip your mind. They can become real impediments to researchers. Well, they exist to be sure that researchers follow the rules, that they don't get themselves in trouble, they don't get patients or in trouble. So that's very important. But they also exist to find ways in which the research can be done without people getting in trouble. So they are really more facilitative than they are impediments. And that philosophy, I think, is very important in an institution, so that all of these various regulatory agencies are not viewed as just big problems that have to be overcome, but as ways but as people that you can work with to facilitate what it is you're trying to achieve. And I think we did that.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Oh.
When historians look back 50 years from now on the history of MCW, what do you want them to say? And this is what Bill Hendee's legacy is.
Dick, I don't have a good answer for that question. I wish I did. You know, I never did anything with the idea of building a legacy or a reputation or this. I just had a great time working with people and a great time in my profession. And whether there's a legacy or not there is really not very important to me. And I don't know how to answer that question. I suspect in 50 years, somebody might pick up a book with some dust on the cover and look in there, and it'll be a history of the college, and my name may be in there. But I don't see this as a major legacy. I mean, if I had been president of the college or something like that, maybe it would be different. But I just know that I met some really great people here, had the opportunity to work with them. We built some good things together. I think the school was better as a consequence of that effort. And if there is a legacy to be had, it's just that I did something that made it better.